Hello and welcome back to Ladies of Lore, the podcast where we take all of the most wonderful women of mythology and folklore and we unpick, unravel and explore their origins, their stories and how they've changed through time to arrive in today's modern world. I'm India and I am so grateful to have you here with me today. If you are new to the podcast, welcome on in. I really hope that you enjoy it here, and if you do, please feel free to follow on your favourite podcast platform, and if you really enjoy it, and you'd like to leave me a review or a comment, if your platform allows that, I would love that very much. Your comments mean the world to me, and it's just so lovely to see so many of you really engaging with all of the stories of these incredible women. I also have my TikTok account, which I'm trying, and it will have plenty more content very soon. I've even brought like a little tripod gimbal situation and everything like that, so I don't have to prop my phone up against a pile of clothes on my desk. So, that's all to come. I will make use of it. And I also have the Patreon where I post lots of things for all tiers, paid and unpaid. And this is also where Heroines of History lives, which is my series on women throughout history. February's episode was all about Yaa Asantewaa, who was the Ghanaian warrior queen who led an army against British colonial forces. Really cool episode. Such a fascinating figure to research and to tell you all about. Anyway, let's talk about today's episode because it's a very special one. I told you I had some cool things coming up and I wasn't lying. I'm a woman of my word. Not so long ago, I had the absolute pleasure of sitting down with author Ayana Gray. Ayana is best known for her Beasts of Prey series, which draws deeply on African myth, folklore, and just these amazing, richly imagined worlds to centre complex, powerful young heroines. Her work consistently explores what happens when girls who are often pushed to the margins are thrust into the centre of their own stories. Ayana and I took some time to talk about her latest novel, I, Medusa, and this is a truly wonderful, and dare I say it, my new favourite, reimagining of one of Greek mythology's most infamous, but also most misunderstood figures. Told from Medusa's own perspective, or Medi, as she begins, the book revisits the myth that we're all pretty familiar with, right? But it asks us to really look again at power, at punishment, and at the stories that history chooses to preserve, and who it chooses to protect. Now, Medusa was actually the first ever episode of Ladies of Lore, and in the future I'd really love to actually redo that episode with a lot more depth and exploration. Now I've found my feet a little bit with the podcast. But if you've listened to that episode, you will hopefully remember that traditionally Medusa has been remembered primarily as a monster, as this Gorgon whose gaze turns men to stone. But the reality of it is that her myth is far more complicated than that, and it's very much tangled in themes of victimhood, of transformation, and that uneasy boundary between girl and monster. And if you want a little bit more context before you listen to the conversation between Ayana and I, please do feel free to go all the way back to the start of Ladies of Lore and have a listen. Or you could do it afterwards, or you could just not do it, and that's an option which is also totally okay. I'm not in charge of your life. But yes, in this conversation, Ayana and I explored myth, monstrosity, girlhood, power, and the importance of representation and what it means to reclaim a voice that history has tried to control and sometimes to silence. And I'm so excited for you to hear it. But without any further yapping from me, here is the fascinating conversation between the wonderful Ayana Gray and me. It's just such a privilege to be able to talk to you today, so thank you so much.
Thank you. And where are you from, India?
I am from a little town in England.
South, north,
It's
east,
south,
west?
south-ish. It is literally the tiniest town. We have one shop, and that is it. But yeah, I mean, thank you so much for being here. Yeah, it's nice to have a chat with somebody with a bit of a different insight to explore something in this way. So I think as well, Medusa just feels a bit like not overinterpreted, but definitely when you mention women in mythology, I think people's minds gravitate to Medusa.
Mhm.
Me included. Medusa was the first episode I did of this little podcast
Ooh.
was on Medusa. So people's minds tend to go there because there's a lot of takes
Oh
on
yeah,
Medusa.
and probably will continue. She's such a captivating figure.
Mm,
I imagine there will be more.
for sure. I've obviously I've read I, Medusa and I really really enjoyed it. I really loved it. I think that Medusa shows up with a lot of complexity that is sometimes or a lot of more nuance, which is sometimes lost, I think, in other interpretations, which sort of cast her as a villain, full stop, without taking into consideration all of that
Mhm.
nuance. But I felt that a lot when I was reading I, Medusa. Yeah, it's really exciting to get to talk about that and
Thank you.
explore a bit of that. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask a little bit about you, really, and just was going to ask you just to tell me a little bit about where you were at in your life when you started to think about writing this book, which ties in nicely. I did ask, so I have a little bit of a Discord server and a Patreon for my podcast, and I asked, did anyone have any particular questions they wanted to ask? And one of them was, what was the first moment or idea that led to you writing this book? So I guess that kind of ties in with, where were you at, and did that have
Yeah.
any influence over making the decision to write this book?
Yes. So with this book, I can actually remember pretty clearly January of 2023. So I had my previous book series was not finished. I was still working on those books. And because I am a lifelong fan of Greco-Roman mythology,
Mm.
sometimes I'll just Google things and just read, like,
Me too.
I'll go to
Yeah,
Wikipedia
yeah,
pages. I'm just a learner. And I
yeah.
wanted to know where Medusa was from. Like where was her eye? Like where did she live? What cave was she in? And I thought that I was going to get a pretty quick answer. And instead, I got a lot of different
Hmm,
answers,
hmm,
a lot of competing answers, because it turns out that there's no one consensus on where she was from. And one of the theories that I read about was that she could have been on or near the continent of Africa, which makes sense because her murderer uh, murders her and then moves
mm,
on. We know the next part of his story, he interacts with Andromeda, who was known as it's written as Ethiopian princess,
hmm,
but not true Ethiopia like we know it today. So we know that he does go to the continent of Africa.
hmm.
And so there were all these theories on why it made sense. And I had never even entertained or thought about the idea of Medusa having any proximity to Africa, even though Greece and the northern
Yeah, yeah.
not not there, but not very far. But once that was even introduced into my brain, I remember having this like aha moment and being like, wow. And then I started to think about how and there's no universal experience when it comes to being a Black woman, but so many of the experiences, plural, of being a Black woman ties so neatly into particularly Ovid's version of Medusa's
Mm,
story. And all of these threads started to connect and come together, and it was almost intimidating.
mm,
As a writer, you have plot bunnies, you have ideas, and sometimes they're very exciting, but you're like, is that just an idea or is there something there? And so I wrote an outline and I had other books to write. So I wrote the outline, then I put it away and I said, if this book is still exciting, if this idea is still exciting to me after I've done the books I'm contracted to write, I'll come back and I'll keep going. And I wrote the books that I was supposed to write, came back and was still just as, if not more excited about it. And then I told my agent and he was like, "Oh my gosh, you have
mm,
to write that." Um, and so I did. And
mm.
it was a really cool experience because there's enough of Medusa's story through the different translations to provide the skeleton, but there were so many gaps that I really got to use my imagination to fill them in.
Yeah, I think that's one of the amazing things about myth. A lot of it is missing. There are a lot of gaps in these stories, which I think makes for such a fascinating experience when you read retellings, because everybody's going to fill those gaps with something meaningful to them, I think.
Mm,
Um,
mhm,
in terms of how the book opens, it opens with Medusa already at that point of being labeled a monster. Was it
mhm.
important for you to open it there? And what was your motivation behind that choice?
So beginnings are always my favorite and most difficult part of writing a story because I usually have to try a few different things to get
Mm,
there. I remember the first draft of I, Medusa began with the Fates. and them discussing her.
Mm.
And my agent was like, "This is really beautiful. I'm not sure if this is where the story should start." And I took that note and was like, "Okay, where else could I start it?" And there were a few different places. But I also, when I'm writing for me, it's a very cinematic experience. I have to
Mm.
picture it in my head. And I think I was just really drawn to this image of this powerful woman, like entering a space where she's assumed to be powerless and
Mm.
getting to flip that and having this like victorious moment, embracing the female rage that she is so well known for in modernity. So we see, quote unquote, the monster, we see the result, we see the rage, but then we
Mm.
get to step back and say, now, how did we get here?
I really enjoyed it. I think it's funny you should say it about it being cinematic because when I was reading, I do this when I read anyway, and sometimes I do it on the podcast when I just sort of say to people what's going like what am I seeing, and then when I the opening of that book, I felt like I could see it so vividly in my mind. So I thought it was an amazing way of opening it. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. And then to go immediately back to the start of the story, there's such a big contrast in who she is from that opening into to the start of the story. It's very powerful, I think, because you do then think, well, actually, how have we got from here to what I've just read?
Thank you.
That's okay. And speaking of transformations, Medusa's transformation in I, Medusa. To me, it feels less like a curse and more like an adaptation to the systems that she's surrounded by. Was that something that you were sort of consciously working toward? Was that something in your mind that it was more, it feels shaped by the systems around her?
Well, we've heard versions, and I'm sure you're familiar. We've heard versions of Medusa's story or interpretations of her story where what Athena does to her is considered a gift, and she
Mm.
does it to protect her and keep her from being harmed ever again. And we've heard versions where it is explicitly a curse. And the thing about both real history and myth is I don't know that there is always one truth. I think
Mm.
we can take
Hmm.
lots of different stories, and the truth is somewhere in the middle of all of it. And so it's true that Medusa and ultimately her sisters take this quote unquote curse that they're given and use it to their benefit. But really, throughout the book, in the beginning, she's Medi and she's a girl and she
Mm.
has these beautiful locks that symbolize love and
Mm.
care, and they're the one thing that she likes about herself because we all know what it's like to be an adolescent and not have the greatest body image, and you have this one thing that maybe you like about yourself. And then she experiences a literal loss of her hair. I did not want her loss of innocence to be tied to sex or assault. So for me, that moment where she loses her locks and she's cursed and she gains the snakes is supposed to really symbolize her loss of innocence. She also goes from being Medi to Medusa.
Hmm.
There's a little literal transformation. I think as people, we all know that moment when we realize we're not kids anymore,
Mm.
whether it's because of a singular experience or whether it's because one day someone walks up to you and it's a kid and they look at you and they think you're an adult and it's strange. There's always that shift where you're like, oh, I'm an adult in the world now. Like I'm on my own now. And in Medi's slash Medusa's story, there's it's that shift is very literal. You can point to the exact moment she goes into adulthood by force,
Mm.
which unfortunately is the experience for some people. Some people are not ready to be pushed into adulthood, but that is exactly what happens.
I think I actually do. I was going to come on to the locks. Actually, that is one of my next questions. I will come back to that. But before I go there, speaking of sort of this transformation, obviously Medi to Medusa, and it's that loss of the innocence, and it is a huge transformation in terms of the direction of her whole of her life, of how people perceive her as well. It ties in really well with a question that I ask myself a lot when I'm writing my episodes and looking at other women in mythology and folklore from various pantheons, and that is who gets labeled as monstrous and who is protected. What is the difference and why does that happen? And that seems to be more of a thing, and mostly a thing when it comes to female characters across mythology. Why are some people labeled as monstrous? When you think about sort of who's labeled monstrous and who is protected, how do you think that's explored in I, Medusa? Is that something that you thought about?
Yeah. So one of my two degrees is in political
Mm,
science and with some focus in political violence. And one thing that I've sort of been trained to think about is power, like
mm,
always trace the breadcrumbs back to power. So when someone is being vilified, my immediate question is who benefits from this? If we take a young woman who had an affair with a powerful man and we start pulling out all these suggestive photos from her social media and we start taking screenshots of things she said and painting her out to be this horrible person, who benefits from that? Because
mm.
we obviously don't have quote unquote real monsters, women with snakes for hair in our modern real world. But we can assassinate character. We can make
Yeah.
someone out to be quote unquote monstrous as far as their morality and their values. Anyway, I always trace it back to power. So yeah, who is benefiting from this? Who is in some way uh, whose responsibility is being where is responsibility being shifted to
Mm.
when we vilify? And it's not always women. It can be anyone, and it is usually marginalized people who
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
they don't necessarily have the resources or the community to fight back.
Hmm. Yeah, you do find that, I think, especially with marginalized communities. I think a lot of the women that I focus on in the podcast, regardless of where their stories might originate from, you get to a certain point in time when places are colonized, and indigenous people and their belief systems are vilified and are painted as barbaric, and they don't have the power. They didn't have the power to prevent that. And I feel like it's really interesting to also not just follow that thread backwards, but also to follow it forward into the future and see how that's
Mhm.
impacted how people view certain pantheons and things now, even today. So it's really
Mhm.
interesting that you said that. So thank you for that as well. So I said I was going to ask about the locks, because I was one of the things that I was really struck by while I was reading I Medusa is Medi's locks, because it's so clear and so evident that they are very deeply loved, intimate, and then they are violated. Um,
Mhm.
and hair carries so much meaning and so much history. It feels in this book. And Medusa's hair is, the snakes have very traditionally been seen as a site of fear, control, villainy,
Yeah.
evil,
Mhm.
and reimagining them as locks, or her hair as locks at the start of the book feels very intentional. I think you've sort of covered that a little bit, and also a really interesting cultural shift and really culturally significant. So I was just wanting to ask you really to tell me a little bit about that decision and about the gravity of that, and why you chose to write it this way and what it means to you.
Yeah, this was one of those moments where I had kind of an aha moment early in the conception for this book. So um, I won't pretend at all that hair and the culture behind hair just belongs to Black women because that's not true. But I know there is a distinct culture within like I would even say Black American culture around
Mhm.
hair, and um, it's been shaped by slavery when women used to braid hair in certain patterns to convey messages when enslaved people were trying to run and run to freedom. So it begins there, or having to have your hair cut off when you were taken from whatever homeland and brought to the Americas, all the way into, I always think about my grandmother growing up in 1940s Harlem, and talking about the girls, how girls with quote good hair were treated differently
Mm.
and used that as a sort of way to divide, and how it in many cases was considered like one of the most important physical features. I think about like the tradition of going to the beauty shop and the importance of taking care of hair. I think about um, being a little girl and my mom insisting that she wouldn't let my sister and I go out the house without our hair done because it was a
Mm.
reflection of care. If you go out without your hair done, it means there's nobody at home looking after you and making sure you're cared for. There's just so much emotion tied up in
Mm.
hair, specifically in the Black American community and other communities too. But my touchstone is my community.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah.
And it just the importance that's placed on it. And when we think about Medusa, what is she known for ultimately? Why is she recognized? Because she has snakes for hair. And if you read some of the ancient poets, all they say about her is she was beautiful and had beautiful hair. Again,
Mhm.
this emphasis is placed on her hair. They don't talk about her personality, where she was from. They don't even mention her age. Like it's just she was pretty and had good hair. And so I saw an instant tie there. And I also drew from personal experience. I have like core memories of sitting between my mom's knees and her doing my hair on Saturday so that it was nice for Sunday church. And that was just, and that was, even though I didn't appreciate it as a child, that was an expression of her love, the care, being gentle with me because I had very thick hair and taking the time to be gentle with me and also creative with what she would do. And again, there's just so much buried emotionally in what seems on the surface like a pretty simple thing.
It's definitely something that comes through when I was reading the book. I just you could tell the amount of love and significance, and it's symbolic, and it really that really translates really well when I was reading it. I you could just you could feel it, it was very much at the forefront of her identity, and then yeah, I really enjoyed that. I really, yeah, it was one of my favorite things about her. I think was just that love, and that you could just feel it. I enjoyed
Thank
that
you.
a lot. The book as well doesn't end with justice, so to speak. I wanted to talk a little bit about systems
Mhm.
and politics to an extent.
Sure.
I'm not trying to force any direct parallels to anything, but it's to me the interpretation that I got from it was that the book is very clear about how systems and structures protect themselves, and
Right.
protect those at the top of those who are in charge of those systems, and maybe make moves to punish survivors or
Mhm.
acts of survival. And to me, that feels very current and relevant right
Yeah.
now. So that got me thinking about Medusa as a figure in general. And
Mhm.
part of when I did cover her on my podcast, we spoke about things like where she appears now, both as sort of a symbol of vilification, but also as a symbol of resistance. And a lot of that is sort of feminist reclamation of the narrative. So when you think about Medusa now, do you see her as an individual tragedy, or perhaps a sort of a symbol of a pattern that that keeps repeating?
I think Medusa's myth at this point, and this is kind of what I tried to allude to at the very end of I, Medusa, um, she she has grown larger than life, like what she
Mm,
means to people, why people get Medusa tattoos. There are different reasons people get Medusa tattoos. And um, certainly among other things, I think she is a symbol of what happens. I think she's a symbol of those systems you've mentioned and kind of being a victim to them, surviving them, how some people attempt to take these systems and fight against them in their own creative ways. Um, for some, she's a victim. For some, she's a survivor. For some, I think people forget, and this was what I wanted to talk about in the book, that maybe at one point she wasn't the symbol. Like even though being a symbol is a positive thing, that's still an extra label being put on you that
mm,
you didn't necessarily ask for. Um, and I talk about Medusa as though she was a real person because that's how I feel after writing her
mm. Yeah,
story.
yeah, yeah, I can imagine, yeah.
Even if it's and I guess it applies to real life too, because when you think about I'll be specific. Women who have become the face of different movements, especially around assault,
Mm,
even though they're revered and admired, they didn't necessarily ask to become these icons of a
mm,
movement. They became it through their circumstances and kind of engaging with that idea of even when it's a positive label being put on you, it's still a label being put on you without
mm.
your okay or even having the control of your own narrative. And that can be a really disorienting thing.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. I think you don't often stop to think, actually, wait, did this person ask for all of the responsibility and all of the narrative that comes with being a figurehead for a
Mm.
movement? So that's a very interesting way of looking at it. That leads me to another question I had about myths in general. because I do talk about retellings and how things change and what makes them change. What is it that has influenced this change? Do you think that myths like Medusa's endure and are still so relevant because they change, or because the conditions that they explore and describe don't change?
Mm. I think it's both, honestly. I
Mm,
think that um, to tell a myth, like when we think about the art of myth making, someone tells a story, they tell it to their friend takes the parts that resonate and kind of dismisses the parts that maybe didn't, and they tell it again, and it's similar, but they've changed it. And then they tell a third person, I'm sorry, I sneezed. They tell a third
bless you.
person, thank you. I was trying to
Oh, it's okay. It's all
keep it
right. We
down.
can sneeze. We can.
Um, and so they tell the story again and again and again and again, and they think they're retelling it, but really they're editing and they're putting value and emphasis on what
Mm,
matters to them, and then maybe they skip a detail that they didn't think was important. And so the myth is changing, the through line is still there, but the myth is morphing and changing each time it's retold. And that's okay because that is literally what a myth is supposed to be.
mm,
Um, but I do think that thorough line of, still being angry, especially when I'm talking about Ovid's version of Medusa's story here. The thing that keeps it alive is that it still hurts, it still resonates because even, I mean, we can talk about it in the context of like there are plenty of people who know what it's like to be in some way violated, and then instead of being vindicated, you're then blamed
mm,
and and made out to be a bad person. Um, there are people who know what that's like in that context of assault, and there are people who know what it's like just to have your character assassinated
mhm.
and not be able to defend yourself, and hear people throwing all of these words at you and things at you, and you don't feel like you're getting to tell your story. So I think that the anger that comes from that injustice, we're seeing it all the time. And we
Yeah,
keep seeing it, which is why Medusa continues to be such an iconic figure.
yeah. I'd have to agree. I think it's interesting because things change, but they also stay the same, and
Mhm.
the impact of Medusa, I think, is testament to that. Because, like you say, you see parts of yourself or your life or things that you really resonate with in a story, and you say you will naturally gravitate towards those parts of the story. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's uh, very nice answer. So thank you for that. Um, so obviously that's all been a little bit heavy. So I'll ask you some perhaps a little bit more light-hearted questions because it can be
Sure.
extremely. So now you've written about Medusa. So you've written about Medusa. If you could pick another female from another pantheon, any pantheon in the world, I like to cover them all. I go all over the world. If
Mm.
you could do that from anywhere in the world, who would you gravitate towards? Who would you write about?
Ooh. So I was just telling someone that what's super fun about African mythologies, plural, is that you can see the way that certain figures have transformed as people have moved, either involuntarily or
Yeah.
voluntarily. And so there's a figure, Mamiwata, very
Yes, yes, yep.
popular Yemiya, in West Africa initially, who has moved, and you can see her likeness in different parts of South America, in the Caribbean. I find her to be a really, really interesting figure.
Yes,
Um,
yeah, I've done an
yeah.
episode on Mamiwata.
Hmm.
Very, very fascinating. I found lots of parallels to her and lots of like homages to her imagery in modern day, but also like all over the world. And you're absolutely right. You see the change in these mythologies and how these characters are explored, where things have moved through time, and across the world, either voluntary or involuntary. How would you do it? Would you do it in a similar way? Would you want to try a different approach if you were to explore Mamiwata?
I think what I always, and I did this with Medusa, what I always like to do is like immerse myself and learn as much as I can, because I don't
Mm,
think you can't break the rules unless you know the rules. So look at what's been written about her in all her
mm,
different forms, and then look for the gaps. What haven't we seen before? What parts of her story do we not know about? Or who can we introduce who engages with her in a way that brings something new out.
Mm,
I think that's where I would start. But the thing that's really fun about research is sometimes the research can incite
mm,
questions that lead you down these rabbit holes. So I wrote three books based in or inspired and influenced by African mythologies
mm,
in the YA space, and got to see some of these gods and goddesses and different renditions of them. I made up my own gods for
mm,
those books, but I pulled from a little bit of, oh, I can't even count how many different
mm,
mythologies, and just but I could see the commonalities. Like we always associate water with femininity.
mhm.
And I don't know why that is, but we just do.
We do, yeah.
So I made the choice to do the same in the Beasts of Prey books. Um,
Yes,
yeah.
that's really interesting. With your research process, how did you tackle that with Medusa? Because as we
Mm,
said, there are so many different retellings. There's so many different takes on it. Even the differences between the Greek and the Roman retellings can give
yeah.
things a completely different meaning. You mentioned about Athena. Were these things, was this a curse? Was it a gift to protect her? There's much debate. When I did my research, I was reading people get really intense about what
They
they
get
think.
very
Yeah,
intense,
like,
and they're very protective of her, and protective sometimes in a positive way and protective in an almost possessive way that I also
yeah.
think should be looked at because yet again, this figure who you're speaking for is not getting a voice at this table. And I know she's not a real person, but it's still just an interesting idea that people are very possessive over a figure who ultimately was not real. Yeah, I was worried about that actually
Mm,
when I was writing I Medusa, which is why I wanted to do the research so that if somebody said, "Why did you change this?" or "Why did you do this?" I could point to the scholarship and say, "Well,
mm,
this is why." So I started with the primary research, reading like verbatim. I mean, unfortunately, I can't read Greek and Latin, but reading translate multiple translations and looking for her name, literally doing a control F and looking for her
yeah,
name,
yeah.
trying to see where she appears and what is said about her, and then what resonates. And then again, where are the gaps? What isn't being said? And then once I have that primary information and I feel comfortable, then I go into secondary. And there are professors, because obviously I wanted to make sure I tackle this idea of race and ethnicity in the ancient world correctly. Like
Mm,
there are scholars who've dedicated their entire professional lives to just that topic. So it was reading a lot of scholarship by those professors who talk about like what quote unquote blackness would have looked like in antiquity. And I put quotes around it because people with my skin complexion would not have called themselves black
hmm
in antiquity. But what I wanted to know, if I make Medusa black, and if I put her in ancient Athens, what would her experience genuinely have been like? Initially, I thought, oh, she probably would have dealt with racism, but no, not
mm,
necessarily. What I learned is that people would have seen a woman or a girl with darker skin, but the stereotypes and the treatment would not have necessarily been based in her skin tone. It would have been the fact that she was not Athenian and not from a certain socioeconomic class. Um, there was definitely prejudice, but not the kind of prejudice we're
mm.
familiar with in modern times.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I study history at the moment, as a another extra thing on top of my full-time job that I didn't need to do is a history degree as well as a podcast. And obviously I'm very aware of the position that I speak from when I talk about things like race. It's something that I'm really sensitive about, and I like to learn. I like to know everything I can. But one of the things that I studied was actually people of color in Europe way back, sort of medieval times. And
Right, right.
if you asked anyone on the street, they probably wouldn't think that that was even a thing. Um,
Possible. Uh-huh.
but it was. And the way that those people were treated in society is not the same. It's not. And I think it's very important, I think, to explore that and to help people to understand that, but also people have got to want to do that. And I think people should.
Yeah, they do. And for better or for worse, I guess in my experience, having these conversations in not a casual way, but instead of shaming people, and I'm not saying that's what you do,
Mm,
but like I like to remind people that look at the 1950s weren't that far off, right?
No.
Look at how different we are as a society from the 1950s till now. And I'm not even talking just about race. I'm like, it used to be a big deal for a man and a woman to share a bed. It was
Yeah, yeah,
revolutionary, but we saw couples sharing a bed on television. And that's a relatively new societal change. So what on earth would make you think that our behaviors and standards now would be anything like they like in antiquity or medieval
hmm
times? Why would the same stereotypes about people with brown and black skin persist this whole time and never change? People move around, people different empires have been in power and they no doubt control
yeah,
certain narratives about and stereotypes about different groups of people. Like I kind of gently challenge people to think about it. I'm like, humans change, we evolve. Actually, very
yeah,
quickly.
yeah,
Listen to music 20 years ago. If you want proof, look at the fashion, look at the slang. We are a constantly evolving
mhm,
species. So what I try to say is, why not? What if and why not? Is it
yeah.
so far-fetched to believe that perhaps there were brown and black people in parts of the world that we just didn't know about that were there and had normal
Mm.
lives and were not necessarily treated badly for having different skin? Why not?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think, you writing I'm a Medusa and from the perspective that you've written it from with the characters that you've included and I think hopefully that will help people to actually ask those questions and stop and think, oh, actually, I'm going to look into that. I'm going to look that up, and I'm going to learn. I'm going to educate myself. I mean, like I said to you before, I'm a nerd. I love to know this stuff. I'm going to look it up because I just want to know. But I also do think it is. I do think it is important, to have that sense of openness to changing your perspective and to, know, learning and understanding. So it may very well be that I'm a juicer in some way has done that, and I hope that it has, because I think even for me, who I probably have looked this up before, it still did get me thinking, and I really I think it's really important. I don't know if you've read Legendborn or you
Oh
know of
yeah, sure.
Legendborn.
Mhm,
That's Arthurian, an Arthurian retelling, which is
mhm,
also got a black female lead.
mhm.
Amazing, so cool. And again, I hope that things like that just get people really thinking about it and learning.
And get people talking, hopefully. You
Yeah.
know, like you create art and you hope that it starts conversations. The conversations don't always have to be positive or praising.
Mm,
If you're having a conversation about antiquity because you read this book and were like, well, that's just ridiculous. Ayana did blah blah blah, and then it makes you go look it up, and oh wait, there were
hmm
Black people in ancient Athens. Oh, I just learned something. Then great, wonderful. Even if you didn't like my book, if it got you thinking, talking, engaged in some way, great, wonderful. I've done my
yeah.
job.
Do you have any other favorite myth retellings? I know I just mentioned Legendborn was one of mine, but what what
Mm.
what are your favorite myth retellings?
I love Circe by Madeline Miller.
Oh yeah,
Me,
yeah,
a
yeah.
billion other people. I just think Madeline is such her prose and her syntax and her like that was one of those books that I finished it. I actually finished it the night before I went on my first book tour. And I sat on
Okay.
the floor and I was like, that's it? There's no more.
Oh, it's the worst feeling as well because then you get a book hangover, and then you're like,
Mhm.
I can't read anything else now for a
I
good
need a
like
moment.
month. I need a
Yeah.
hot minute. Yeah.
That's one of my favorites. And of course, as an author, when you ask me about books, I immediately can't remember anything that I've read.
Do you know what? I get like that about anything. If anyone asks me my favorite anything, I'm like, have I ever had a favorite of anything at all? My brain just
Now,
goes.
I will also say I loved Clytemnestra by Costanza Casati. She's another brilliant
Mm,
writer, another one that I really liked. Um, and this is not pulling from a specific myth, but in the YA space, there is a trilogy. In the first book is called Little Thieves by Margaret Owen,
mm,
and she pulls from Germanic, loosely pulls from Germanic folklore and the tale
mm,
of the Goose Girl.
mm,
And I just love Margaret's writing and her world building, and the way she takes pieces of the lore but then weaves them into her own
mm,
imagination. So I love anything that pulls, and I get to learn about new,
mm.
like this is such a tangent, but I learned that like the idea of a nightmare. there's like roots in Germanic folklore, but there are also roots if you go back to like um, African American folklore and the idea of like putting salt around your house to stop the
Mm,
haints from coming in and terrorizing you in your sleep. Like in both, those are very different pieces of folklore that have kind of the same figure of this
yeah,
creature that terrorizes you in your sleep, even though they're miles and miles apart
yeah, yeah.
culturally.
You see that a
I just
lot,
love
and
that. Yeah.
no, I'm the same way. I mean, I did an episode of about Cinderella. Actually, no, am I talking about Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty? I think it's the same, similar. It's a similar thing either way. But when you look at these tales, I mean, these are fairy tales. There are very similar stories from Asian folklore tales as there are in Germanic folklore tales, and they even have like similar plot lines, similar
Yeah.
side characters, similar punishments for the villains, and you sort of think that's insane. How has that happened? How have we got like a Snow White tale here where somebody's having to dance till their feet drop off from Germany, but then over
Mhm.
here in China, there's the exact same thing. I don't, it's so fascinating when you start looking into all of these parallels that you have from different cultures. And I mean, no, I'm getting all nerdy about it because it's very
Yeah,
exciting
but
to me.
no, it's
Yeah.
super exciting, and especially now when we talk
Mm,
about climate too, I think these are reminders that for all the different clothes and skin tones and hair
mm,
textures and languages and food we eat and the music, for all of these beautiful things that make us different, we have these beautiful threads that
mm,
also bring us together and remind us that we're all still human. We all still share fear and joy and despair and anger and hope and all of these emotions, and
mm.
we preserve them in our stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Is the power of storytelling is you can't underestimate it. I think, who are we without those? That's how we pass down history and
Mhm.
heritage and
And
hopes and
lessons.
fears. Yeah, exactly, exactly. So no, it's one of the things that I love to do is to look at parallels and where can you find a very similar character from this tale in other areas of the world. I think it's very unifying, isn't it? It is a
Yes.
reminder that we are all on this earth and we are all human and we do all have hopes and dreams and fears and like moral lessons. The last question that I had about books that you like is
Yeah.
what is a book that has impacted you that you would encourage people listening right now to read? Just one that's really sort of hit home for you in whatever way that may
Oh.
be.
I have one, but it's a very, it's not very lighthearted at all.
No, that's fine. We we
Oh
we love
gosh.
sad girl energy over here. That's fine.
It's a very weird one. You guys have to just brace yourselves. And I'm looking up the title because it's one of those that has a title and then a subtitle, and I want to make sure I get this right. So, a friend recommended this to me. This book is called Personal Effects: What
Hmm.
Recovering the Dead Teaches Me About Caring for the Living. So
Okay.
this is a gentleman, his entire job, it's actually fascinating to me. His job is to respond to mass casualty events. Thinking
Hmm.
about like in America, the Oklahoma City bombing, plane crashes, 9/11, like all of these huge tragedies that are actually very diplomatic messes and just
Mm.
physically, grotesquely very messy situations. And he talks about his experience of doing this for decades and how it's affects his a bit like, it's a surprising book because it's this gloomy topic, but preserving the dignity of those who pass away and caring for those who have to survive the aftermath of that. And he goes all over the world. And I should probably say the author's name, sorry. Robert A. Jensen is his
Hmm.
name. But he goes all over the world, and what's beautiful and sad and touching is that grief doesn't discriminate. Whether you're
Mm.
in Africa, or a country in Africa, whether you're in the US, whether you're in an Asian country, a South American country, the way people respond to tragedy, while it can vary, it can also be the same in different places. And I don't know, it was one of those books that I read very slowly and digested very slowly, and it left me feeling very thoughtful about just how we treat each other as people. really strange niche
Mm.
topic for a book, but
But
it was so
no,
fascinating.
no, that does sound absolutely fascinating. I think, sometimes you read stuff like that and it really comes from like left field and it really does impact you. And like you say, grief is very unifying. We all feel it in whatever way that may be. I will have to look at that one. I will. We do have one question actually that's come from somebody else in the Discord server, one of
Yeah.
the
Okay.
members, and that is about tropes
Mm.
in retellings of myths. So I feel like, especially recently, there's been a lot of myth retellings. They've said, how do you feel about common tropes in modern retellings of myths? And do you try to either incorporate them or avoid them in your work?
Oh, that's a lovely question. I always say tropes exist for a reason. There's a really great lecture that I've listened to about the power of id,
Hmm.
and Jennifer Lynn Barnes.
Hmm.
Um, she is an author, of course, but her background is in psychology, and she has this really great lecture about the power of id and how authors a lot of times in their first books they write all the tropes, they put all the tropes and stuff that they like into their books, and then as they get more established they try to be mature and not put the silly
Mm.
tropes in because that's not serious. And then readers sometimes like their older stuff because you can just tell they're writing the things that make their brains light up.
Mm.
And so I really loved it because it encouraged me to think about, like, okay, what tropes do I love? What tropes make my brain light up? And then how can I introduce them in new ways? So I'm not against tropes in any
Mm.
genre, particularly in retellings. I think if you're going to use them, put them in because you as a writer, because you enjoy them, not because they're trending. I think it's obvious when
Mm.
people just shove
Shove it
tropes
in there,
in
yeah.
to hit a trend. But I think it's okay to write something that resonates. There is a reason that people like enemies to lovers. It's because it creates this immediate tension when it's done right,
Mm.
where you get to see this beautiful transformation where you have a lot of one emotion, and that emotion is still very intense, but it transforms into a different emotion. Um, in I, Medusa, I didn't intend this, but it ended up through revision happening. There's kind of the trope of the trials. And it
Mm.
was born from the fact that I'm like, okay, I know Medusa, I know Medi gets to Athens. I want her to be doing things that are challenging and kind of pushing her to grow. And it makes it all the more painful when it's all taken away from her
Mm.
later because you feel like she went through so much to get to where she was, only for it to be taken
Mm.
away. I enjoy that. I enjoy different kinds of challenges and trials, like as a reader. So I put in the things that I love. And then I also subverted some things because I guess the kind of micro trope of girl or guy or main character goes somewhere and immediately finds an ally who is encouraging them, and then we find out that they are not who we think they
Mm.
are. Um, is not quite, I mean, I think we think of these allies, and in the trope, the ally is usually someone who comes to become a friend, and then here that's not what happens. So this is like all a super rambly way of saying I like tropes and I put in the ones that
Mm.
that I enjoy reading. And if I don't, I'm not going to just shove one
Yeah.
in for the sake of it.
No, that makes absolute perfect sense. I think it's, you know, if it resonates with you and if it adds something, if it raises the stakes, if it feels right for that character
Mhm.
and their journey, then that makes total sense to put it in. So what do you hope that people sit with after they've read I, Medusa? What do you hope they think about and take away from it?
I think I'm always happy when the books I write start conversations,
Mm.
even if they're not the conversations I expect. I'm usually not in the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I think I'm happy when they start conversations. And I was talking with someone about like how we connect myth with real life, with for better or for worse, with
Mhm.
what's happening in the now. Um, there are people who might be very like loosely familiar with Medusa as a figure, or they might know a little bit about her story, but they've never given much thought to her background or how she became who we know her as. And I mean, in my ambitious, hopeful way, I hope that people read I, Medusa and then they're like, okay, well, if if I didn't get it right about her, what else possibly did I not get it right about? What
Mm.
other figures, what other groups of people have I maybe written off because I know a little bit, but I never bothered to
Yeah.
dig in and learn about this land, this place, this culture, these people, this specific person. And that it goes both ways, right? Because there are also figures that we are told are quote unquote the good guys, and more as we dig into history, we're finding out that either they were not necessarily good,
Hmm.
or maybe they were a little more morally gray than we thought. Like as children, we're taught morally black and it's very black and white. There's no ambiguity, and I think as we get older, that naturally evolves. And so I hope that for some people, I Medusa helps have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean that it's funny you said because it, literally my next question was going to be, do you feel that writing I Medusa and spending a lot of time with Medusa and doing the research that you've done, does that has that made you see or view or think about other monstrous women, whether that be in myth or throughout history? Has it made you think about them any differently? Has it made you interrogate those narratives that we have about them more or question things more?
It hasn't surprised me, but I'm less surprised when I find out that a woman we previously vilified in some way turned out to not be who
Hmm.
we said. And I mean, to give you a very like specific pop culture reference, a few years back there was a documentary I think about Britney Spears. And
I did,
I
yeah,
grew up, I mean, I was a 90s kid, so I grew up she was a pop star and then she had her mental break and the way she was talked about and laughed at and caricaturized. She wasn't turned into a monster in
hmm,
the media, but she was painted as all of these things.
yeah,
And watching her, I mean, I was sad, but not surprised
hmm,
to find out that a lot of people very deliberately controlled that narrative to paint her a specific way.
yeah,
Um, and controlled her literally and physically. So when I see it in the media now, when I see quote unquote the truth comes out, these exposés where these celebrities that we thought one thing about them and then we find out new things about them. Um, it's not like, oh wow, I didn't think about that. I'm more like, yep, this is what happens. And I'm also very
yeah.
skeptical whenever a story comes out, and we're immediately casting this
Mhm.
person and it's also it's often a woman or a marginalized person. I'm
It's yeah.
naturally skeptical.
Yeah, no, me too. And I think having done this podcast for about a year now, all of the research that I've done and you know, really diving into the stories, but also why is it told in that way? Who would this have been told to? What's the context? What's the political context of this? What's the social
Yeah.
context of this? Why was this? What, who we went through this before, but who's gaining from this? From telling
Mhm.
it in this way? And I think when you read retellings like I'm Medusa, it does start to bring up those questions in your mind, and hopefully that extends to other other things, whether that be something in real life like Britney Spears or other books that you're reading, historical figures, things that you have always just accepted as true that somebody's a certain way, but you've never
Yeah.
really interrogated why is that? And like you say, it does tend to be women, it does tend to be marginalized people. Why are we thinking about that person that way? And hopefully that makes people want to learn and makes people want to be open to changing an opinion that they
Yeah.
have just because that's what they always thought they had to think.
Yeah,
Um,
and it's not just individuals. I want to really emphasize that. It's
yeah.
also why do we have this stereotype about this group of people?
Hmm.
Who benefits when we say all blank are blank?
Hmm.
Or all this group of people are always good. Like I hope it expands into what we think about certain countries that we engage with, what we think about certain demographics. I'm a Southerner, right?
Hmm.
In the United States, and there are stereotypes and
Yeah.
and misnomers that are attributed to my community as Southern people. So it can be expanded to not just what, oh, I got that wrong about this one person. It can be, what did I get wrong about an entire community?
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. And hopefully, yeah, people will start to take that away and really have a bit of introspection about it, have a little bit of courage to challenge
Mhm.
narratives and to challenge why we're
Yeah,
doing this. And that, I think that's the only
empathy.
way that we can move forward and try and not to get too big about it, but try and make a world where we are more unified and more understanding of each other. What did writing Medusa teach you? Did you learn anything about yourself, about retellings, about Medusa herself? What is the thing that you feel you've learned
Uh,
that's the most important?
I think on a very personal level, the parts of I, Medusa that were hardest for me to write from the feedback I've gotten, and I'm very careful about engaging too much in reader spaces and reviewer spaces, but in the times that readers have reached out or said this meant a lot to me, it was the parts where I was being tapping into, things that were very personal to me and tapping into these really earnest moments. Um, where you feel a little bit as a writer like you're exposing yourself and you feel vulnerable and it's
Mm,
very scary, but that is, I think, where the good art comes from. Um, and so my lesson very personally was to keep doing that, keep being
mm.
honest, keep writing from an authentic and honest place, and the right people will find those moments and in some cases need them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can tell when things have come from a very earnest and personal space, and I think naturally you gravitate to those things, and you connect emotionally with those things. I think it's yeah, you can tell when things are written in that way, and I did feel that through I, Medusa as well. I could see the love that had been put into that, and the thought.
Thank you.
So you're very welcome. Last question is there anything that you wish that people asked you more about I, Medusa, about your writing in general? It's a bit of an odd
Hmm.
question.
I've really enjoyed with this book that the conversations have been so different. Like
Mm,
sometimes it's squarely about Greco-Roman mythology, but sometimes I get to talk about history and race, and I
mm,
love like the different kinds of conversations I've gotten to have. No two have been the same. Um, I always, it's not even that I like to be asked a question, but I always like to shout out Dr. Sarah Darbu.
mm.
She's a professor at Stanford, and she wrote a book, Untangling Blackness and Antiquity. And I just like to shout her out as much as possible
Yeah, go
because
for it.
when I was still like kind of unsure, like if this, my fear was like, were people going to say this is a woke book? Does this book have any legs? Is any real, like, is a real classicist going to read this and be like, poof,
Mm,
you know, like I had a lot of doubt and a lot of insecurity and fear about whether I even had like grounds to tell this sort of story. And then I discovered her books, I listened to some of her lectures, and it was so validating to know
mm,
that she's not the first, but one of the more recent professors. There's a whole community of professors in the classical studies area who've dedicated their professional careers to this. And it was so gratifying. And like this, when you're researching and you want the answer to a super specific question, and then you
mm.
find a professor who's written like volumes about it, and you're like just so happy.
Jackpot.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's the best feeling. It's like a treasure hunt. So it's not, yeah, that's not a question, but I love to talk about her and Professor Frank Snowden, deceased professor from like the
Mm,
early 1900s, one of the first professors to talk about it in length, blackness and antiquity.
mhm,
Uh, I guess I want people to know, like, in case I'm Medusa feels in any way groundbreaking, I appreciate that, but I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, and I'm able to write this book, or I was able to write this book because at one point were scholars who trekked into spaces where they were all alone.
mm,
There was no previous scholarship, and they had to fight and prove that people of color had the right to exist in these spaces,
mm,
and they were not always welcomed. And so I'm so thankful to those
mm.
scholars.
Oh, amazing. I will make sure when I publish this episode, I'll make sure that there's all in the show notes. I tend to include all of the sources, everything that I talk about. So I'll make sure that they're in there because I do have a lot of people that like to actually go away and find that and read that. So I'll make sure that that's in there because it's and I'll make sure I see it as well because I'd really like to go and read those too. That is about all I've got. But is there anything else that you would like to talk about? Is there anything that you feel important for you to say?
Oh, you've asked such great thoughtful question. I feel like
I, I've I've tried.
talked about
You're
and I
actually my first ever interview. So I was
oh cool.
I know. So I was a bit nervous.
Let me ask you. I have a question for you.
Fire away.
Put you on the spot.
Go, no, no, please do put me on the spot.
You were familiar with Medusa, well, Medusa's myths in the
Yeah.
plural. Was there anything that you were looking for in I, Medusa? Either like you were like, oh, I wanted to see this, or I was expecting to see this, or maybe you were like, I was looking for this and I
Mm.
got that moment. Because some people, I'm asking because some
Mm.
people have missed the P word. I'm not saying his name, but people have had like some people miss him, and some people are
Mm.
like, no, I'm glad he's not there. So I'm always curious.
I think every time I read a retelling, I always want to feel like I have an emotional connection. I want to feel like I'm getting inside that character's psyche. I want to feel their emotions, and I have read retellings where I haven't really felt that.
Mm,
So that going into it, I've read previous Medusa retellings and not felt like I spent enough time with Medusa as a character to
mm,
understand her feelings because it's such a when you think about what's actually happening to her throughout this whole thing, like there's a lot of thoughts and feelings going on in there. There must be, and sometimes I felt like I haven't really had for me because I just want to know everything, like a thorough enough exploration into how she's feeling in those moments. So one of the
mm,
things that I really hoped for going into I Medusa was that I would feel that connection with her and
mm,
be able to really feel like I'm in her shoes. I'm really feeling her emotions. And I absolutely got that, like from the start, which, I said to you that very first, the opener was so strong. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to be obsessed with this now. And I was, and I felt like I really got to know Medi and I got to feel with her and go on that journey with her and experience everything that she's had to go through and how that's changed her and how that's changed her perception of people and the world and herself. And I really, really enjoyed that. That's one of the things that I loved about I Medusa was just being able to feel, I felt like I could feel it. The empathy was there. So that's my answer to that question. Hopefully that's
yeah. And
made sense.
I wasn't setting it up
No.
for praise. I genuinely, like what I found on social media, and no one's ever, well, most people are not rude about it, but it's just interesting. Like people are like, I want the moment where she dies.
Mm,
I want the moment where she gets to turn a man to stone. I
mm,
want like, people are, and this is again another beautiful thing about these myths that are so popular is people are really drawn to specific moments or
mm,
specific interpretations and feel personally attached. And it's always interesting to see like some people are like, I don't need to see this character, and then some people are like, but what about that
mm.
character? Or what about this thing this reference? And I think it's really beautiful and just fun.
Yeah, no, and I think, but I think people do get attached to moments, don't they? Because it's like the iconography of it. When I did my episode on Medusa, one of the things I sometimes try and include is where is she in artwork? And if you think
Mm,
of Medusa and the artwork around Medusa throughout time, it's very specific imagery. It's usually her death. It's usually not anything about her life. It's either her post death or it's her doing evil things, but you don't ever get a look into her mind. And for me, I like to feel when I read, and I really like to be able to feel like I'm fully immersed in that character's emotions, and I really got that with my Medusa. So, oh well, thank you so much for your time. Like I really, really appreciate it. Like I say, it's my very first interview, so it's been a very good experience. You've been so wonderful to talk to, and I really loved I Medusa.
well, thank you. Thank you for having me
No,
and letting me be the first.
oh,
If
appreciate
you
it.
ever need names, I'm sure there are a lot of authors. There are a lot of
Mm,
authors who write in this
mm,
space or pull from different folklore, and it's just such a fun topic.
it really
It's
is.
it's history and literature and culture and like it's this fusion of all these different disciplines. It's so
Mm.
much fun.
It really is, and it's so amazing to look at just women in that space as well, because I feel
Yeah.
like, we, in the nicest way, and I mean this in the nicest way, we've all heard about the men. Like we know that that's been done. Um,
Mhm.
and and part of the reason why I started the podcast was because there wasn't anything. I was trying to find something about it, and it wasn't there. And I thought, well, I'll just do it myself then. I guess,
Yeah.
um, you know. And it's just fun. It's just fun, and it's fun to talk to women as well about women, focus on women, and just give us a little bit of a time to shine. And again, so grateful for your time. Really love the book, and anyone that is listening right now, I say this from my heart, not just because you're here. It's such a good book. It's very, very, very well written, and I loved it, and I really encourage anyone to pick it up.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Thank you for being here. I really, really appreciate it, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your day. And that was my conversation with Ayana Gray. I absolutely loved this discussion, particularly the way that Ayana really invites us to look again at figures that we think that we already understand. And I really enjoyed getting a chance to talk to her about representation and, just to think about how can we really look at how we view the world, really look at our thoughts and our opinions and rethink them. Get a little bit curious, do some research. Her Medusa is not just a monster. She is a girl navigating power and punishment and transformation in a world that is very often quick to name women as dangerous. As always, I would love to know your thoughts. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find me over on Patreon and also in the Ladies of Lore Discord, where we continue all of these deliciously nerdy conversations. It's been so nice to see you all chatting in there, so if you are interested in that, please do join. You will be the first to know about everything. And I will say as well, this is just the first of many exciting things that I have coming to the podcast. I can't wait, guys. I can't wait to share it all with you. Thank you again so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed this, and I'll be back next time to unravel another thread in the rich tapestry of women in mythology and folklore. My voice went really deep then, didn't it? I'm going to leave that in. I'll see you next time.